On the morning of June 25th, 2014, nothing felt unusual in Long Beach, California. The sun rose quietly, casting pale light over the sidewalks and palm-lined streets. It was the kind of morning that encouraged routine, the kind people trusted. Joggers stepped outside with headphones in. Parents prepared for work. The city moved forward without hesitation, unaware that one ordinary decision had already set a tragedy in motion. Chelsea King woke up early that day. She had always been disciplined about her routine, especially her morning runs. Exercise wasn't just a habit for her, it was a release, a space where she could think clearly before the day began. She dressed in familiar running clothes, laced her shoes, and checked her phone before heading out. At 6:47 a.m., she sent a brief text to a friend, casually mentioning that she was going for a run. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a warning. It was just another ordinary message, the kind people send without a second thought. Chelsea left her apartment and stepped into the quiet streets. That was the last confirmed moment anyone would hear from her. Hours passed before concern crept in. At first, it was subtle, an unanswered call, a delayed response. Chelsea wasn't the type to disappear without explanation. As the morning turned into afternoon, worry began to replace patience. Friends tried again to reach her. Her phone rang unanswered. When evening arrived and she still hadn't returned, fear settled heavily over the people who loved her. By nightfall, the police were notified. What followed was a frantic, desperate search that spread across the city. Officers canvassed the area where Chelsea was last believed to have run. Search dogs traced paths along sidewalks and trails. Helicopters hovered overhead, scanning rooftops, alleyways, and nearby green spaces. Volunteers joined in, holding flashlights and calling her name into the darkness. Flyers bearing Chelsea's face appeared almost immediately. She looked vibrant in the photos, healthy, confident, alive. Her smile gave people hope. This was someone who looked like she belonged in the world, not someone who should vanish from it. Yet there were no answers. No witnesses stepped forward with a clear account. No evidence suggested an accident. There were no signs of struggle along her route. It was as if Chelsea had simply been erased. As the search continued into the next day, tension grew heavier. News outlets picked up the story, and the city of Long Beach became invested in her return. Parents hugged their children tighter. Runners reconsidered their routes. A quiet unease settled into public consciousness. Chelsea's family held on to hope. They believed she would be found alive. They believed she was strong, resourceful, capable of surviving whatever had happened. Each hour that passed without news made that hope harder to hold, but they refused to let go. Then investigators found something. A security camera from a nearby parking structure had captured footage from the morning Chelsea disappeared. At first glance, it didn't seem significant. The camera showed a man walking calmly across the frame. His movements were steady, almost casual. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He appeared ordinary, unremarkable in every way. But then investigators noticed something else. Behind him, partially obscured, was a woman. She was alive in the footage, walking, present. But something about her posture told a different story. She wasn't running freely. She wasn't choosing where to go. She was following. The man in the footage was later identified as John Gardner. Gardner was not a stranger to the criminal justice system. He was a registered sex offender with a history of violent behavior. Years earlier, he had assaulted another woman in a case that bore unsettling similarities to what investigators now believed had happened to Chelsea. Despite this history, Gardner had been released early from prison. He had reintegrated quietly into society, moving through the city without attracting attention. On the morning Chelsea went for her run, Gardner had seen her, and he made a decision. What happened between the moment Chelsea stepped outside and the moment she appeared on that camera would later become the focus of intense investigation. Prosecutors would argue that Gardner stalked her, waited for an opportunity, and then acted. There were no dramatic scenes, no public confrontation, just a calculated act carried out in plain sight. When Gardner was arrested days later, his demeanor stunned those watching. He did not panic. He did not resist. He answered questions calmly, as if discussing someone else's actions rather than his own. To investigators, his composure felt chilling. It suggested premeditation, not impulse. Chelsea's body was eventually discovered in a shallow grave not far from where she disappeared. The confirmation devastated her family, but the horror did not end there. As details emerged, the case exposed deep failures in the systems meant to protect the public. Gardner's criminal history raised urgent questions. Why had he been released early? Why had warning signs not been acted upon? Why had someone capable of such violence been allowed to walk freely among unsuspecting citizens? Chelsea's parents sat through every court proceeding. They listened to testimony describing the final moments of their daughter's life. They endured the unbearable, not because they wanted to relive the pain, but because it was the only way they could still be present for Chelsea. The trial revealed a disturbing pattern. Gardner had been given opportunities to reform. He had been monitored, but not closely enough. Oversights, leniency, and procedural failures created the conditions that allowed this crime to happen. The courtroom became a place of reckoning, not just for one man, but for an entire system. When the verdict was delivered and Gardner was sentenced to life in prison without parole, there was no sense of victory. There was no relief, only a quiet acknowledgement that justice, when it arrives too late, is never complete. Chelsea King became more than a name. Her story resonated because it was painfully ordinary. She had not taken a risk. She had not trusted the wrong person. She had not ignored obvious danger. In the days following Chelsea King's disappearance, the city of Long Beach began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. People who had never spoken before exchanged quiet nods on sidewalks. Morning runners altered their routines, choosing busier streets or abandoning solo runs altogether. Parents drove children short distances they had once walked. Fear didn't announce itself loudly. It seeped in slowly, settling into habits. Her death forced a conversation that many people avoided. It challenged assumptions about safety, about predictability, about how easily danger can hide within normal life. It reminded the public that silence can be deceptive, that predators often blend in seamlessly, and that systems fail in ways that have irreversible consequences. Years later, Chelsea's memory remains powerful, not because of the violence that ended her life, but because of the life she lived. She was responsible, she was careful, she was loved, and that is what makes the silence she left behind so loud. If you are interested in true crime unsolved cases, please hit on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching.